Olá, boa noite. Eu sou Gisele, pesquisadora da Cátedra William Butler Yeats, da Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas da Universidade de São Paulo, e hoje inauguramos o primeiro programa da série Poetry Beyond the Page. Quero agradecer à professora Laura Zarra, presidente da Cátedra, à Faculdade de Letras da Universidade de São Paulo, e também ao Michael Kearney, que aceitou estar aqui conosco. O Michael Kearney é professor na Universidade de Tóquio e, além disso, também é artista. Eu vou deixar para apresentá-lo quando ele estiver aqui conosco. Por favor, Priscila, pode colocar Michael de volta. Aliás, eu aproveito que ele está chegando para dizer que entre os dias 14 e 16 nós teremos o simpósio de Irish Studies na América do Sul, 19º simpósio de Irish Studies, chamado Narratives of Responsibility, Irish Studies, Humanities and the Arts, que esse ano recebe a poeta Catherine McCarthy, que estará conosco, lançando seu livro em português chamado Emblemas, uma antologia que reúne poemas dos seus 6 livros, sendo o último ainda a ser lançado ano que vem. Então, estará conosco também para o Poetry Beyond the Page de outubro. Então, Michael, thank you very much for joining us. It's a great pleasure having you for our inaugural program. And I have to introduce you, even though your description is there in our website. I have to say that Kearney he has an academic life as associate professor and has published articles, book chapters, and has edited 2 important volumes on issues regarding literature, identity, and art, From Conflict to Recognition, Moving Multiculturalism Forward, and 100 Years of the American Dream, Representations and Conceptions in American Literature. But he's also an artist, and that's why he's here. And he's, I would say, a multimodal artist, a plural artist, or in the words of his Japanese translator, Setsuko Adachi, he's a camouflage artist. As he's a musician, a poet, a band leader, and he even draws and paints, I guess. In 2016, he published his 4-letter words. And since then, he's been collaborating with One Imperative, whose link is in our YouTube description below. Please access it and have fun with it. But before we talk about One Imperative and his other artistic works, I'd like Michael to ask you, you've been a musician for longer, is that correct? So you created the Symbolic Order. Tell us a bit about it, please. And thank you once again.
Well, thank you. Good evening in Brazil and good morning in Tokyo. Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate, honored, nervous, but early in the morning, it's a good stress to have. I've, I guess, started playing music maybe 8 years old or 9 years old. Button key accordion. My father wanted me to play button key accordion. So as an 8-year-old, I was sent to lessons. And as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, the accordion is big. And the button key is the one where press in, it's one note, pull out. It's a different, so you have to do this a lot. And very difficult as an 8-year-old. So luckily I could start playing guitar at 15. much easier. I could barely breathe playing the accordion. I would breathe with the music. It was terrible. But still a wonderful experience now as an 8-year-old, traumatic. And then in university, I was lucky enough to meet somebody named Matt Adamick, and he and I formed a band. The first name was Leda's Distress, and from Yeats's poem, Leda and the Swan. And then they changed the name to a lyric I had called Where I Wake Warm. But I left that after getting married in 92, moved to Japan and left. And then we all got together again, maybe 2010, and started playing music. Everybody had their own projects, and we help each other. And I came up with the Symbolic Order as a name. I robbed that from Lacan. And so since then, we all help in New York. We get together and we collaborate and write and compose. And if you go to the Symbolic Order link, you can access all the other bands, Atomics. So it's always, to me, music and poetry has always been something where you get out of your everyday language, your everyday mind, escape the virus of the word.
I guess time also brings many changes, right? And as I was going over four-letter words, I found the initial poem, very significant because it went back to another poet, which is less talked about, nowadays more talked about, which is Edward Carroll Brathwaite, Caribbean poet who died in 2020. And he also created proems, which he called was not prose, poetic prose, because he said poetic prose is really canonical. I mean, everybody talks about it. It's very central. Poem should be prose and poetry. It's something else. Is it the case here? I mean, I really loved this poem because you have the courage to talk about the difficulties of having a book published. So tell us about it, if you can.
The idea for the book came to me in the mid 90s in a bar in Tokyo. I was talking to an artist friend of mine. His name is Bill Rendazzo. And I said, we should collaborate. And, I'll write the poems and then I won't talk to you about them. You just come up with like whatever image you want. And I was thinking of, William Blake, Songs of Innocence and Experience. He did both. And so he had control over them. And then I said, well, it's interesting. Hunter S. Thompson and Stedman worked together, where Stedman, they would collaborate on it, the images for his books. I said, I like the idea of the Barthian idea, Roland Barthes, where the author is dead. I said, I don't want to tell the artist what to do. I just want him to read the poem and come up with whatever he wants. I thought that would be truly collaborative. But we could never get it going for at least a decade. And then Jeremy Fernando and I in Singapore were talking about it. And Bill couldn't, at the time, very busy, wasn't able to do the images. So Jeremy Fernando, who runs Delere Press, they found a wonderful artist in Singapore, Johan Hanapi, and he did the images. But it took, that book was maybe 20 years in the making. There's only 16 poems. But the idea was, I'm not against obscenity, but four-letter words, of course, in English, has a certain meaning. That's a four-letter word. You can't say it on the radio. I wanted to use words that weren't considered obscene words as the titles, all of them 4. And then 4 times 4 is 16. So that would be the idea. And it worked out for me, the poem. I didn't want to write an introduction in prose, the usual book introduction. I said, it's a book of poetry. It should be a poetic introduction. And it should be about an act of conception, conceiving the idea for the book. And since I put a lot of thought behind, not, of course, with the poems, but the concept of the book was very important to me. And that idea of the Barthian, the death of the author. So I want to explain that I didn't talk to Johan about any poems. Whatever images he came up with were from his readings of the poems. And it worked out well as an academic exercise because when the galleys came in, Setsuko saw Johan's images, which I think are great. And she said, there was one with, I guess, a masturbating Snow White next to the poem Ant. And Setsuko was, what the hell? How is that your aunt? So when she finally met Johan, she asked him, she goes, did you read the poems? And he goes, I glanced at them. And I thought, that's perfect. The author is truly dead. The poems are out there. If you read it and it has a meaning for you that I never thought of, well, yeah, that's literature. Who knows?
Lovely. Lovely. And I was wondering how much you thought your poems would also be non-canonical or marginal, and as regards arts in general, because you later on, over the last 8 years, I would say, you've increasingly collaborated with One Imperative, and that's where the arts are really integrated. For example, if we look at issue number 20, and anyone listening to us can access it. The link is below in the description of the YouTube link. This issue number 20 has this wonderful poem called Magenta Bound, and it's at the same time full of not only other references but also other arts. And how do you go about it? Is that being marginal as well? I mean, how does that feel to you?
I guess it's being marginal, but I don't know. There's an intent. Definitely, musically, I come from, I guess, New York underground punk scene and like do-it-yourself of the punk idea. And I got long ago the idea of selling out, like signing with a label and then making pop music or music, for profit. I've always tried to shy away from that. So that, I guess, forces you to be marginal. I remember Neil Young, when Harvest came out and he had a big hit, he goes, I wasn't trying to write a hit. It just happened. So there's the idea of trying to adhere to your aesthetic. And if you're, I guess, like attacking the culture, like Dada. I remember, I think it was Helsenbeck saying, like, we were trying to figure out what are we attacking? We're attacking ourselves, the bourgeois. So you try to not adhere to their system. So I guess that forces you to be marginal. And then with Magenta Bound, I'm a very bad painter. I would call my art disaster pieces rather than masterpieces. And I don't know, you're sitting having coffee and the idea came, okay, it was, the color magenta was in the title of the imperative. And I thought, magenta. And somehow the idea, the concept magenta bound and being tied up, and I got the image. So I made the piece of art. And Symbolic Order is all about examining image, sound, and text, putting them together. So it's kind of, for me, a lot of it is deconstruction, pulling things apart and then putting them back together. And then this one, I decided, well, let me leave them a little bit apart. Let me have the image and the sound, and I'll just publish the words without actually saying them or singing them. So like, it's not put back together yet. The audience can put it together if they want. They can read the poem while they listen to it, and then it's in their voice, and they can look at the image if they want. So that's kind of an idea behind it.
I mean, when I read it and I listened to it and I saw the image, they were all just one big action. So to me, the three arts are there very much integrated. But when you told me that the drawings from the book came out completely in a very independent way, that was new. And also for the reader, I mean, the death of the author is there, right? So congratulations not only to you, but also to Jeremy and all the other contributors in One Imperative. Amazing work you've been doing, and particularly with your integrating your own drawing. So which one came first? According to what you said, the image came first and then the poem. And would you say the poem is representing or translating the image, or how would you relate that as an author, as a poet?
Well, yeah, the image came first. And then for me, with that image, it's not really an effort or a conscious thing. It's the narrative to the image came with it. There was an Irish poet, Dermot Healy. He's passed away now, that I was with. I met him in Singapore and at an ISIL conference. And he and I would, in between sessions, go and stand under the trees because it was very hot. Irish people in Singapore, it's hot and it's sunny. So we found shade and a bottle of wine or two, and we would smoke cigarettes on the no smoking campus where nobody could see us. And he was rather famous, so people come up and talk to us, and they would talk. They were asking him about creating process, and he said prose is almost blue collar work. You wake up every day, you're working on a novel. You wake up every day, you get there, you work on it, you type it out, you bang it out, you go back the next day, you keep going, and eventually it tells you it's finished, or you decide you're finished with it, and the novel or the short story is done. He said poetry is a visitation, and that really, I went, yeah. I don't know where the idea comes from. You're there and a poem comes to you. And that also reminded me of Kurt Cobain, who in an interview, they said, where do you get your inspiration? And he goes, I don't know, God. Okay, interview over, yay. So, but the image and the narrative came at the same time. And that's something, I'm in Japan. Manga is very big. I'm all over the world. Do you like manga?
Yes. We have also in Brazil.
I'm not against manga, but what I like about art is when we look at a painting, as the audience, our brains work to put a narrative to the painting up. Even if it's abstract expressionism, we're trying to put a story to it, figure out the narrative to the painting. And in prose or poetry, we form images. So many times a novel is made into a movie, and people go, that's not the way I pictured the character. So that's kind of how, to me as a creator, they came at the same time, the image and the narrative. And then I kind of worked on them at the same time. And while I'm painting a little, and I'm writing and working on the poem a little, and I'm also, I don't know, the sound, the cacophony that would go with this swirling, you're over a swirling void, but you're bound in it, came to me. And so how do I get that sound? And using tape echo and things like that.
Lovely. And Mike, you mentioned poetry as visitation, and you reminded me of Octavio Paz, the famous Mexican poet. His definition on poetry as resurrection, and not something that brings immortality. He said, well, everybody thinks of poetry as immortality. It's actually something that more like resurrection. And I am actually reminding us of Octavio Paz, because in issue number 19 of One Imperative, you have a poem that really called my attention, which is Having a Beer with Pablo Neruda. And I love that poem because there's a lot of humor. I think most of your writing, it's very humorous. I laughed a lot every time. I laugh a lot every time I read your poetry. So, but there's not just humor there. There's the idea of intertextuality. You're always bringing the authors that are inhabiting you as a poet and as a person. So the wonderful poem also in that, I think in 4-letter words, the poem Book or Rape, or The Rape of the Book, a note to Alexander Pope, and the poem Hair as well. I mean, that's a bit tragic or dramatic, but it's full of humor, and I think it's a way that you find of looking at the world or looking into society in a very serious and critical sense, but also in a very light way through humor. So is that the original, or is it my reading out of the author? or after the death of the author?
I think that just is with me, that it's not intentional. So, I'm not thinking of, I got to make this funny. They just come out like that. But in New York over the summer with a friend of mine, Chris Sorokin, who's the host of the radio show I go on, So we always spend a lot of time together after the radio show. And I play Symbolic Order there and sometimes read poetry. He goes, "You're so dark, Kearney. You're so dark." And he goes, "Don't you have anything light, something poppy? Oh my God, you're so dark." And I'm going, "Is it dark? I don't know. I think it's kind of funny." And then I showed him an Irish television show, Bodkin. And he just halfway through the first episode, he looked at me, he goes, "This is a comedy?" And I said, "Yeah, don't you?" He goes, "It's so dark." I said, "It's hysterical." And he goes, "Okay." He goes, "I understand. Yeah, you're very Irish." I think the Irish may seem to have a lot of darkness and humor. Like apparently Beckett, for all of the, the gloom of what people see in his work, I find it quite humorous. And apparently he's a great guy to go for a beer with. There's a story of him, going out and drinking in Paris and bringing all these places. The guy almost died, and Beckett's just trundling along, having a great time. So it's not an intention. It's just how things are, maybe. That's part of my maybe identity.
Your transcultural identity. I'm going to ask you about your Irishness, but just before we do that, let me ask you to tell us a bit about this transposition, this cultural transposition, which we read in poems like For, which was one of the poems that made me laugh a lot because I went through the same as I was in Japan, and I had no idea that For was such a big trouble in buying items. So you can never say, "I want 4 eggs," or "I want 4. No, never say that. And then you have this wonderful poem. So tell us about it. The audience might not know, because this is not in one imperative. This is only for those who have the book, the privilege of the book. And maybe you can even read it to us if you don't.
So For, okay, I have it here. No. I was always interested in that number when I found out that it meant death in Japanese. And if you say Yong is okay, but the other pronunciation she, yeah, you shouldn't use that. So I guess being Irish and being dark, I kind of always liked that. And after my wife and I were married and moved to Tokyo, our apartment was on the 4th floor. And so when her friends came to visit and I answered the door, I said, "Yokoso Shikai, welcome to the floor of death." And they go, "Don't say that, don't say that." So I'm always like, for that poem, I'm looking for, in Japan is such a bad number. My son's an ice hockey player. And when he was 4 years old, he started playing, and he could get the number 4 in Japan because nobody wanted it. And that's like Bobby Orr's number. In North America, everybody's killing for that number. They want 4. And he's been lucky enough to play in Japan and North America. He always gets number 4. He's very lucky. And I just thought it's so interesting that, it's just a number. But now it's one of my favorite numbers because of the idea of death. But that's something we put on it. Right? Human beings create these constructions and adhere to them so strongly. Like even in the hospitals, they try not to have a 4th floor in Japan. So I find it very funny. I wanted to play with that concept of 4 and death, and ordering plates. Like, no, I want 4. Oh, like it's just a cultural construct, and we as human beings want to hold on to that. It gives us a false ground that we build upon. But I always look at it as a poet like Ferlinghetti is insurgent art. We should be attacking certain things. And I look at all the strife we have in the world now, Gaza, Ukraine, everywhere, go anywhere in the United States, 288 school shootings in 2024. The next is like 8 in another country. That's a huge problem. Those are all things that we've made. We created our own worst problems. So I just wanted to, I guess, play around with that concept with 4 and death and things that we make that are just cultural constructions, and we can just change them.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so let's go back home, and where home is. Home is in your book again, 4-letter words, and it's one of my favorites because It brings so many ideas of belonging, not belonging, belonging by not belonging, and where is home, particularly in your case. I mean, tell us a bit about yourself. I mean, you have Irish background, but you were born in the US, so tell us. And I shouldn't call you Irish American, because I know from your academic side you dislike that concept of American, but United Stasian, which is a word we also use in Portuguese in Brazil. So let me give you the word, please.
Yeah, my parents were born and raised in Ireland, and I think my father went to the United States in '58, and then at about 16, and then he was 18, he joined the army because it's a way to get, a green card and citizenship, permanent stuff. And my mother and her family went in 1960 because my grandfather had asthma and Dublin was too wet. So they said, go to Arizona. And he only got as far as New York. It's as far as he could go. So everybody in my immediate family, I'm the first Kearney in that family born in the United States. And so all, like, from birth through my whole life, Ireland was like, in the summer or winter, if you're going to Ireland, you were never going to Ireland. You were going home. And are you going home this summer? And home always was Ireland. And then, many of my relatives worked in the United States 10, 20 years. They started to have families. They all wanted to go home. The idea was you're going to go back to Ireland, back home. And many of them did and settled in and went right back in and loved it. But just as many moved back to Ireland, and then they were like, oh, I can't live here. It's changed. It's not what it used to be. And so they moved back to the United States. Friends of my parents, I won't mention their name, think they've moved back and forth 4 times. I'm like, you're never going to be satisfied, because when you're in New York, you're trying to get that image of Ireland that doesn't exist anymore. And then when you forget about that Ireland's changed and you move back, they go, it's not the same place. And that always reminds me of Edward Said, like with the idea of home. Said has the thing about, he writes about Yeats, and he's also talking about this fantasy projection that we have to create. So when Ireland's trying to get rid of England, the Celtic revival, we create a fantasy projection of our native land, our home. And I kind of said, Irish Americans or Irish people the Irish diaspora that's gone all around the world, they have that fantasy projection of what was. And when they go back, it's different. So I've been in Ireland so often. And in Ireland, I would often be considered an American. And in the United States, I would be considered Irish. And I have 2 passports. So which is it? So it's always the other person is going to decide what I am. But yeah, I don't like the word American, so I use United Statesian. And Irish Americans, I've lived in Ireland, been in Ireland. My Irish friends, they would often make fun of Irish Americans. There's even memes. The Irish American, my grandfather came from, Ballymahon in 1922. Do you know him? Oh, yeah, sure, of course. Kind of idea of the Irish American. Everybody's Irish. So.
Okay, so can I ask you to read? Can you give us your voice for the poem Home,
sure,
please?
For home, right?
Yes, and then I'll follow with the translation. I've got the translation in Portuguese for that one.
Okay, hopefully I'll read it well. Standing on the banks of the broad, majestic Shannon, the sun glimmering, beautiful, like diamonds, silver slivers off a half-submerged shopping trolley. The New Ireland's forbidding shores, Eastern Euro trash diluting the natural culture. Not my thoughts, dear readers. I'm United Statesian trash, too obtuse to appreciate the natural culture. And to the Irish, for generations abroad, let's hold on to what has become fiction. Sons and daughters of brothers and sisters, in-laws you never want to see. Let's continue our incestuous self-adoration. While back on the home island, slick suits, sexy Guinness models, mobiles and Benzes, there's no place like home.
Thank you. So I'll follow with the translation. O lar permanece ali pelas margens do largo e majestoso Shannon. O sol brilhando belamente, feito diamante, e a prata despontando de um carrinho de compras meio submerso. A região costeira proibida da Nova Irlanda. O lixo do leste europeu diluindo a cultura natural. Não são meus estes pensamentos, queridos leitores. Eu sou um lixo estadunidense, muito obtuso para apreciar a cultura natural e para as gerações de irlandeses no estrangeiro. Agarremo-nos ao que se tornou ficção, filhos e filhas de irmãos e irmãs e agregados que nunca se quer ver. Continuemos, pois, a nossa autoadoração incestuosa, enquanto de volta à ilha, que é o nosso lar, temos lustrosos modelos sexy de Guinness, celulares e Mercedes. Não há nenhum outro lugar como o lar.
Sounds much better in Portuguese when you're reading it.
Thank you. How does this poem dialogue with the second poem in four-letter words, aunt, about your aunt, your father's sister? Please, I mean, it's such an effective poem, that one. We are not reading, but I'll leave it for the future readers of four-letter words. But I got interested in that connection.
So the aunt would be my father's aunt, Aunt Mary, my grandfather's sister. And she went to the United States before everybody else. But she was married to a man named Tom Murray. So she was Aunt Mary Murray. We just always Aunt Mary. And a very carny face. Like she's definitely a carny. Never had children. But when all of her nieces and nephews would be coming to the United States, she would kind of look after them a little, take care of them. And when I was a child, she was old. And she was very crabby, very kind of cranky, and she smoked an awful lot and had a gravelly voice, and from hard work had these gnarled hands. So she looks like a bitter, wizened woman, but full of love. And always, as little children, she's like pressing like $1 into your hand when you're leaving and giving you a kiss. So just so much love, but like a very wizened, thin creature, smoking lots of cigarettes, very full of life, and I guess darkness. And when she was like, she had to have one of her legs amputated from poor circulation, so she would be in a wheelchair, and she wasn't happy about that. But I always found her, like, her cursing at certain things quite comical. She'd get very excited about this wheelchair, or the wrestling on TV. So, and for her, she was so, to me, a New Yorker, but then also so Irish. She was like kind of like a bridge. And it wasn't until later I found out, I think it was my grandfather's father had been married and moved to Argentina and had children, and the children and the husband died, I think, of cholera. Then she moved back to Ireland and then married my grandfather's father. So there's always this idea of going, for our family, Irish, is always traveling. My children, the same, moving. And there's always somebody that's kind of this bridge that we have that connects us back to where we came from, idea. So I think Aunt Mary was a large part of that for me when I was young.
Thank you, Mike. And I was wondering whether this perception of a sacred day, a holy day, which is in the poem Enough, which I think is in issue, which issue is that?
Is that maybe
32? Issue number 32 of One Imperative. I was wondering how much that poem is a consequence of your constant traveling, of your being in different places, and then now you can tell us about your your experience of being in between, being here and there, and east and west.
Yeah, that poem, the four poems in that, I think it's Cedar Beach, and I think called Some Grains. And in that issue of One Imperative, there is an umbrella image for the four poems. They're all kind of connected to a beach that's 10 minutes from my house in New York. And that beach, like, you can work all day, and the sun's going down at 8:30 p.m. in summer. You can work all day, finish at 6:30, still jump in the car and go to the beach and just sit there, and it's quiet and empty, and it's all you hear is the waves, maybe some seagulls. It's just a wonderful place to see. My wife and I go. One of the first times we went there, she was, "You're very quiet." I said, "It's peaceful." And like, to me, it's a place of solace. And like, if I had to choose some place where I could be permanent and just stay, like a home, it would definitely be connected to that area of New York on Long Island and Cedar Beach, because of the space and the solace. So that's like one of my favorite places. And there's a lot of deer around. And in one of the poems, I spell deer D-E-A-E. Is it D-E-E-R, D-E-A-R? Is it deer like a lover, or is it deer like the animal? And then when I was thinking of they, like the Barbary Coast Ottoman governors, the deer are all around that beach, like guarding it, like lords of it. And I thought of Barbary pirates for some reason. And I said, wow, yeah, in New York, they often say, instead of they go they came over, which is also maybe an Irish pronunciation. So the idea of playing with language, playing with sound, maybe, when you're young and you're reading Joyce, there's always that idea of like sound. I think very poetic, like writer, and his poetry is one thing, but Ulysses, everybody knows the ending of the Dead, such poetic stuff. So to play with the language and play with the spelling, like when we see a word on the page, we know what the meaning is. But if you just hear the word, you don't know the spelling. This is something that's connected to swamp and swamp vignette, from like One Imperative and the Symbolic Order. Poetry was originally oral, and Setsuko Adachi wrote a review of Swamp Vignette, and she wanted to publish it in a Singapore Review of Books, and they said, well, this is not a book. And then she wrote back and she argued that, well, it's poetry, so that's literature. Why does it have to be written on the page? Because I explained to her that that's only a mode of transmission. All poetry was original oral before we could write. And the only reason we write it down is so that you could send it around to different places. Now we can actually record the poem. We don't need to write it down. We have new recording devices. And music and poetry and literature, to me, are like that. The writing, like G.R.E.A.T talks about, preferencing, say, the written with difference, written over the sound. And I like that idea too. So there's a song, The Reverend. So the Reverend is following the sun. Is it S-O-N? Could be Jesus. Or is it S-U-N? That he's walking off across the plain following the sun in the sky. The listener should decide. Maybe for me, I'm going, it could be both. Maybe it is both. But some people might listen and go, oh yeah, he's delusional and he's following Jesus. Or he's become delusional because he's under the hot sun and he's just walking into it. So that allows the listener, the audience, to play. So that's why I do little things like that. Sometimes it just pops in. Oh yeah, that could be this. I hope I explained that somewhat okay.
Yeah, and you even gave us some response on your choice of being a multimodal artist, if I can say that, or a camouflage artist, as Adachi Sensei says. I would like just before we read, I need to ask you to tell us these poems, because we can have the honor of your voice, and we can even imagine the poem, even if listeners are not reading them at the same time, but at least listening to your voice and recreating the sounds and the images as we listen to you. But before we do that, I'd like to tell you that Professor Laura Zaha is thanking you in the YouTube chat. And also, she's asking, she really enjoyed your story about your relatives in Argentina. And she's asking if you know the year of that. Was that in the end of the 19th century, or?
It was the very beginning of the 20th. The beginning of the 20th, probably. My grandfather was born around maybe 1920, 1916. So it would have probably been 4 or 5 years before that. So I'm guessing could be 1908, but nobody really knows. It's, they're all dead now. And my father, was talking to me about it, and he only could tell me what he knew and what he was told. Because I guess in Ireland at that time, she would have been a widow, a young widow.
No.
Yeah.
No
How would she be perceived? Yeah. And she ran off to Argentina with some fella, and now she's back. There's lots of, Ireland, like, again, the religious constructs that were imposed upon the people, Joyce, right? Got to fly by the nets of nationalism, language, and religion, very kind of trying. I guess you have to be creative, dark, and humorous to try to get away from those nets. And
certainly, yeah. And as much as you were also bringing such plural and multicultural art and multimodal art as to go through all these moving here and there. So I'm sure that your story, as Professor Zaha is saying, is very interesting for all those studying Irish immigration in South America.
I heard even G.E.A.A has connections. I have an idea, a satire of Riverdance called Seamus Guevara, and I didn't get to write it yet.
So that's one thing we're going to read by you in the future, hopefully. Can we read the poem?
Which one would you like?
The ones you've just mentioned, Enough or A Holy Day, please.
Oh, okay. Sure. Been enough. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The day came to an end. Twilight danced around the bend of the earth, and a silent darkness engulfed all in my being. If only every day ended in this peace, the glare of the new day's sun would not strike me as so merciless. But too many nights are filled with a dread of the horrors that might be upon the morrow. Trite atrocities forced upon us via systems contrived by a few to placate their gluttony. Existence is marred, destroyed by the greed of the vain, petty, Unzeusian brutes. Please do nothing but incite condescension. Evil mirth swells into perpetrators. No hope for a final resolution, yet there is a warm solace in evenings like this.
Suficiente, ou dia sagrado. O dia chegou ao fim. O crepúsculo dançava ao redor da curva da terra. E uma escuridão silenciosa engolfou tudo em meu ser. Se ao menos todos os dias terminassem nessa paz, o brilho do sol do novo dia não me pareceria tão impiedoso, mas muitas noites são preenchidas com receio dos horrores que podem vir no dia seguinte. Atrocidades banais impostas a nós por sistemas criados por alguns para apaziguar sua gula. Existências maculadas, destruídas pela ganância de brutamontes vãos e mesquinhos. Apelos não causam efeito, exceto incitar condescendência. A risada maligna se eleva entre perpetradores, sem esperança de uma resolução final. Ainda assim, há um caloroso consolo em noites como esta. And then there's a slight pulse, which is following the same series. Can we go over that one too?
Sure. Yeah, so a slight pulse. Sun ricochets off sound, trees audibly ache. January is the coolest of months. Dear come to me, severely timid, almost trusting, seeking, comfort, sustenance, quelled curiosity. Day back off, turn, carry on, sensed my fleetingness. Me at the verge of nothingness, a slight pulse before the expanse.
Leve pulso. O sol ricocheteia sobre o som, as árvores doem audivelmente. Janeiro é o mais frio dos meses. Querido, venha até mim, severamente tímido, quase confiando, buscando conforto, sustento, curiosidade apaziguada. Eles recuam, viram, seguem em frente, perceberam minha efemeridade. Eu, à beira do nada. Leve pulso antes da imensidão. I don't know if this was intentional, but I see T.S. Eliot there. April is the coolest month, and January is the coolest month.
It's definitely influenced by T.S. Eliot, but it's probably not intentional. It just comes from, going to university and studying literature. And then, for the next 40 years, you just read and write and read and write. It's a wonderful life. Like, I went to university and started as an electrical engineer and go, oh my God, I can't do this. After a year and a half, like, if I get a job in a company as an electrical engineer, and oh my goodness, I have to suit and tie and go to a desk. I'll kill myself. No, I have to study literature. That'll be fun. And of course, your father and mother going like, how are you going to get a job? I have to be a teacher because I know I won't support myself on writing. I'm not going to make enough money as a writer to live. So I'll have to become a teacher. And high school looked dreadful. So you got to be a professor because then you can do whatever you kind of want. You can bring in Beckett. You can't bring Beckett into high school, especially in the United States. They're ready to burn it. So I know that I was there, and at Cedar Beach, that body of water is called Long Island Sound. And the sun was glancing off the water. And, the same with like in Home with the shopping trolley and the broad, majestic Shannon. The broad, majestic Shannon. I'm sure that's in a song that I heard in Ireland many years ago. And the idea of the sun dancing off it, but it's off a shopping trolley because there's a Quinsworth nearby. And, kids threw it in the river. Here, I thought, oh, wow, the sun ricochets off sound. And that idea, sound, we don't see it. Even though it's physics and it's a wave and it's moving air, how would the sun ricochet off it? So I thought, oh, that's good. The body of water, there's a play there. And then just that next line fell out of my head. January is the coolest of months. And, as soon as I read, I go, oh, yeah, that's Eliot. Thank you. Everything's floating around in there. And then it just falls out.
Excellent. I don't know which influences are the strongest in your multimodal art, if it's the songs and the music. And then I think of Bob Dylan as well, even though your approach is quite different. But also all these literary figures that appear constantly in your poems. So I'm afraid we have to soon wrap up, but just before we do, let me ask you to give us some hint on the background of the creation of the poem My Bird Dances Like Spanish Moss, which appears in issue 17, and I was very intrigued by that. So give us some hint, please. Why Spanish moss? Why? What's this all about?
I had come back from the United States, and my wife and children are there, and I was back in Tachikawa. And in March, there's a lot of heavy winds in the Tokyo area. It was a nice day, but I had to go shopping. And as I was walking, my beard at that time was about down to here. So it was like a Ronnie Drew beard from Dubliners. It was a little bit longer. And I had to trim it during COVID because wearing a mask with the beard coming out on it just looked too bad. So I don't know if I'll grow it back. But the heavy wind was making my beard sway. I could feel it moving. And then I just thought of Spanish moss, as it's swaying on trees. And that line just came to me. My beard dances like Spanish moss in the breeze. And from that line, then I just created the rest of I had to stop shopping. I went into a bar, ordered a beer, and I had a moleskin notebook. And I just started, as Dermot Healy said, a visitation. The wind blew my beard, and I got that line, okay. And I had to sit down and start working on the poem. I eventually went shopping and didn't buy anything interesting. But at least it was a poem. From just walking to go shopping, and the wind blows your beard, and you get a line. And I always have my moleskin or books with me. And so I better sit down and write this down before it's gone. Because if I didn't sit down and write it, and I went shopping and bought, I don't know, Sprite and bread, I come back, oh, what was I thinking of? And it would never exist. So
that's the visitation of the poetry.
Yeah.
The poem. And if you don't catch it, maybe you can, in your case, maybe you can catch it in a song or in a kind of melody, or who knows, some drawing or painting. But that one also has some video for it, doesn't it? I mean, those who access issue 17 can have multimodal art.
Yeah, that's connected with the swamp vignette. So Jeremy came up with the idea of swamp. And so when I wrote that poem, I go, okay, Spanish moss, swamp, that works. And then the vignette is a short story, 3-part short story. And there's only guitar in it. All the other sounds are concrete sounds, recorded sounds. I went around Tokyo recording sounds and then looped them, played them in reverse to get percussion. So there's car engines. I filled up the Japanese ofuro with water and triple mic'd my bathroom and dropped a rock to get the plop sound, and then play it in reverse and loop it to get rhythms. So it's all very concrete sounds, but they're all connected to that idea of swampiness.
Would you say the integration of the arts makes your artistic communication more thorough for whoever sees or watches or listens to it, or no connection, just a coincidence?
I wouldn't say it, but I would hope it. I hope that's what happens. I hope that they reinforce each other. They make things more poignant. That's my aim, to make it more poignant. But I can't say that I'm successful. And it really depends on who's listening. I'm sure my mother might listen to songs. What is that? And it's going to be nothing. And she looks at a painting. What? So it depends. So much depends on the listener, the reader. And if it doesn't matter if they're 12 or 102. If they put things together and it strikes them, then it's successful for them. But I tried to be. I can't say it, but I would hope it.
Thank you, Mike. I think your being with us gives us some exemplar experience of having poetry beyond the page. So thank you very much. If we can finish with your reading of that poem or any other poem you'd like to give us your voice for, please.
So, okay. My beard dances like Spanish moss in the breeze. I'm just going to pull it up here very quickly. I hope. Everything is a hope. I'm never sure of anything. It's always just a hope. So, my beard dances like Spanish moss in the breeze. A strong and constant wind blows through the cypresses. orchestrating a low-tone lament for the future, to which the Spanish moss slowly sways as it thrives and decays, the wind coiling around and between every fiber, filling the moss with life as it rips it asunder. Everything is rich in this putrid, fetid burst of life-death. At its most exuberant, its strongest, just as it turns to fester. This divine soil, this land, mucked and mired, bursts with future distress, all in the glory of the eddies of this soaked earth, this orb of dew. I don't know this, I sense it. Like a scared, sober passenger in a careening car driven madly by a cocaine-fueled lunatic, knows they're going to lose it in the next curve, that they can never hold this wild, reckless course, that they are doomed by excess and stupidity. I feel the wind in my beard becomes the Spanish moss, sways and grays towards death. But it's still good to feel it, to be alive, to feel this. But the feeling flees as I become disoriented, as I bounce off trees. The mind becomes distressed, lost, no longer mine own to control. The earth pulses, it sucks me in. Mother Nature is incestuous. She's trying to fuck me, one of her own sons. Or is it love she wants to make, to me, make she and I one? This place is too alive, it creeps me out. The trees make sounds, their slurping, like hungry gluttons, threatens me. There are creatures here with me, There are creatures here with me, unseen but heard, less villainous than me, but more deadly. This is their domain, and I will be theirs. I know I will be devoured if I stay much longer, but I can't find a way out. Can't backtrack, no trace of my entrance. Soon no trace of me at all. She is possessive, wants to consume me, energy for her throbbing. I'm tired, thought diminishing, I want to sleep. Perhaps, maybe, I should just lay back and let it happen. Let her subsume me. It would be peaceful and warm. She lulls me. She swarms me, coats me with her. So slow, so pure, so natural. The lush green palliates the severity of my plight. My demise is at hand, and I slide into it, into her, meekly, to warn. You win, my dear. I will be yours. Your soggy seduction has overcome me. I am done. I was done from the beginning and almost always knew it. I will descend into you with a willingness, for I know it is the only way before me. I disappear into her and at last find peace.
Thank you, Michael.
Slipped up. You always slip up on your own poems.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope the ones listening to us can access one imperative, the symbolic order, and get in touch with you for four-letter words or the layered press. Thank you very much. There are many other questions I'd like to make, but time is always limiting. So I'm sure we can continue being in touch and continue our conversation. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm honored and delighted and very nervous for a week. I'm happy, delighted to have done it and happy it's done. But it's a wonderful experience for me. Thank you very much. And thank you for putting links to the symbolic order, one imperative. And if anybody wants to contact me, through this, you can contact me through email, through the symbolic order and other things. And there's connections from the symbolic order to many other things. So I appreciate all of the love and support. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. We're honored with your presence. And see you next month with Catherine Phil McCarthy and her new book, Into Portuguese Emblemas.